Hi, my name is Jillian van Turnhout, and I'm going to share how Ireland moved from "we're not ready" to "why didn't we do this years ago." In 2011, we had an election early in the last recession that led to a change in government. My life changed as the new Taoiseach, that's our Prime Minister, appointed me to the Senate, Seanad Éireann, the upper house of the Irish Parliament, to ensure children had a strong advocate. My nomination was in recognition of over a decade's work on children's rights across professional, voluntary and community sectors. During my five-year term as a senator, the achievement I'm most proud of is having championed and secured an effective ban on the physical punishment of children in Ireland. Under the new law, as of December 2015, a person who administers corporal punishment to a child will no longer be able to rely on the defence of reasonable chastisement. This law dates back to 1860. It originated from a decision in R and Hopley, where Chief Justice Cockburn proclaimed that, by the law of England, a parent may, for the purpose of correcting what is evil in the child, inflict moderate and reasonable corporal punishment. Through its colonial past, England is responsible for establishing this legal defence in over 70 countries and territories across the globe, including Ireland and indeed Australia. The change in law in Ireland has brought clarity. It has increased protection for children. And I should add, it did not lead to an increase in prosecutions. Neither was there an increase in children being brought into the care of the state. Before our law was changed, parents and people caring for less than 4 children in Ireland could and did plead the defence of reasonable chastisement if facing criminal charges in the courts. And this defence was used, and not only that, it created real problems for social workers that were working with vulnerable families whose children were being subjected to ill treatment and harm. They were definitively able to say, no, you can't hit your child. The change in law brought long overdue clarity. Let me take you on our journey. From the mid-1990s to 2009, a significant body of evidence highlighted the need to enhance the protection of children in our laws, policies and services. During this period, there were 18 official reports that highlighted the failures of the Irish state to protect children. The first in 1993 was the Kilkenny incest investigation, which dealt with familial abuse over a significant period of time. In 2009, when the 9-year-long Ryan Commission report was published, it documented what happened to children in state institutions from 1936 to 2000. The catalogue of cruelties to children in state institutions from 1936 to 2000 really highlighted the failure to put children first and lifted a veil back. We could see what had happened to children behind closed doors. These were terrains that had previously been closely guarded. In 2009, I joined many of the survivors in marching on our Parliament to seek justice. From that day onwards, I have met many groups and individual survivors. I learned that they wanted the truth of their experience to be told. They wanted justice. There was talk of a monument, and so many told me, Jillian, our priority is that we change our laws to ensure that no child can be subjected to a similar experience. I carry their words with me, and I strove to do all in my power to ensure our laws would be strengthened to protect all children. In November 2012, as part of our collective response, the people of Ireland voted to enshrine the protection of children as individual rights holders into the Irish Constitution. There was then a slight bump in the road. The referendum result was challenged in the courts by individuals who held a conservative perspective and had opposed the referendum. They lost their case in the High Court and appealed it to the Supreme Court, which then dismissed the challenge. The constitutional change to uphold children's rights was signed into law in Ireland in April 2015. By this point in 2015, I'd built up considerable political capital in my role as an independent, non-party senator, and had garnered a good reputation in our Houses of Parliament for working collaboratively. Moreover, it was 2015 that my political power increased. The government lost its majority in our Senate due to another political potato, which I won't go into here. The net effect was I could force a vote and in theory could get amendments carried. Like Australia, the government in Ireland had been repeatedly admonished during the preceding decade by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child for not banning all forms of corporal punishment. However, it had not acted. In parallel, the European Committee of Social Rights concluded that Ireland was in violation of the European Social Charter. These were important levers, but when mobilising wider support, I found the language of rights wasn't the most persuasive. Instead, my messaging was, why do we as a society accept that we debate if and when it is okay to hit someone, let alone when that someone is smaller than us and probably doesn't understand why they are being hit? Adults have a wonderful way with euphemisms, and we downplay our role. Very often when we debate the issue of corporal punishment or violence against children, we refer to it as slapping. You can almost see an invisible line appear in people's heads about our tolerance level. They say, you know, I'm only talking about a tap, not a thump, a slap, not a belt, a smack, not a whack. And also, of course, this issue is wrapped up in how we were raised. All too often, the knee-jerk reaction is, it never did me any harm. And I would add, and the research is now available to prove, it never did you any good either. The excuse, I got a terrible fright when she ran out onto the road, so I just hit her to show her how wrong it is used concerning children. We all get frights in our life, but my first reaction is not to hit someone. So why do we accept that it is okay when it is a child? One radio listener shared their story during the debate leading up to our change in law in Ireland. She said, imagine my grandmother, who has Alzheimer's, walks out onto traffic or harms herself. Should I use that as a reason to hit her, to slap her? No. Why do we accept we can do this to a child who may have a similar cognitive ability? In Ireland, we talked about how the child is hurt by the physical action and emotional breakdown of trust between parent and child, that they forget that they've done wrong. What you want in effective discipline is for the child to understand that they've done wrong and the consequences of their actions to others. You want the child to feel remorse, but ultimately to still believe that they are a person of value, and slapping does not promote this. As a legislator, I felt responsible to share with parents the evidence-based research that is available, and particular thanks to Elizabeth Gershoff and Andrew Grogan-Kaler, who published their meta-analysis, which clearly shows that there is no evidence that spanking is associated with improved child behaviour, and indeed their research goes on to show the potential harmful effects. We said we know that smacking or spanking has no positive effect, and it potentially causes harm, both physical and psychological. And at a minimum, it has no effect. But given it has no effect, when something doesn't work, what do we do as humans? We either stop doing it or we try harder, and that puts children at risk. We all know how children pick up on cues that they get from their parents and older siblings. I think this picture is one that makes us all remember of our childhood fondly, hopefully. And if you look at Dave Engeldo's series of pictures with his daughter Alice B, you can all relate to children see, children do. I'm also aware of the importance of legislative change leading to behavioural change. On the cover of this game box, look at the children playing during their car journey. For me, this is a memory of my childhood, unimaginable now, as no one is wearing a seatbelt. and we all know the dangers. In Ireland, installing seatbelts in cars became law in the 1970s, but we only began to wear them in the 80s. The change in law empowers the driver and the passengers to insist on everyone wearing a seatbelt. It was a positive change in law that has led to public acceptance and indeed has saved lives. Thinking of the ban of smoking in indoor public places, or one of the laws I was involved in, banning smoking in cars with children. The evidence is clear on why these laws are needed. The reality is that cultural change often follows the law. In 2015, the Minister for Children and Youth Affairs was strengthening our child protection laws with our Children First bill. I tabled a long list of wide-ranging amendments to the Minister's bill, that this could really have delayed its progress. I made it known behind the scenes that I would withdraw most of my amendments if the government accepted only one, that is, to abolish the common law defence of reasonable chastisement. I should add at this point that people advised me, the time's not right, Jillian. Whether it was friends, civil servants or colleagues, they pulled me aside and encouraged me to wait a few months, a few years. They advised we needed more research. We need more parenting supports. We need reform of our social services. Or they said I'd chosen the wrong piece of legislation. I had to stand my ground. I must admit, I took a risk. Because at that stage, I didn't know if I had the support of my fellow parliamentarians or if I would be on my own. I was mindful that in the 1960s, a senator proposed to change the law to ban slapping of girls in schools. And he was unsuccessful and only secured a handful of votes. When I walked into the Senate in Ireland that day, I knew history would prove me right. And if I had to force a vote and found myself as the only person voting for change, then at a minimum, children in Ireland would know at least one adult was willing to speak out and say hitting children is wrong. The transcript of the debate illustrates how I framed the change in law to that of equal protection for children to that is what is already enjoyed by adults. It took several weeks to progress through each stage in both houses of our Parliament, and much to my surprise, every single member of the Irish Parliament chose to support the law change by not calling for a vote. Furthermore, when the law change went back to the lower house, or Taoiseach, that's our Prime Minister, took the unusual but welcome step of speaking in support of the change. For me, it was a collective and powerful moment. It still fascinates me that the moment the law changed, it was as dramatic as switching a light switch. I was inundated with my fellow politicians and others, many of the same people who had urged caution, asking me, why didn't we do this years ago? They all felt good about the change. To further evidence this point, the Minister chose to commence this law within 2 months of enactment, which is a relatively short period for new legislation in Ireland. I've since worked with parliamentarians and civil society organisations in Scotland and Wales to help them achieve similar legislative changes in 2019 and 2020, respectively. This US photo from over 100 years ago is called Witness to a Spanking. It seems absurd to say it. However, 100 years ago in Ireland, you could beat your wife, your dog, and your child. We've changed our laws in relation to domestic violence, animal cruelty, but it took us a long time to change them for children. What does that say about our values? When we think of a home, we think of comfort and safety. And yet in many countries, the law can make a child's home one of the unsafest of places. In essence, where corporal punishment is permitted, the law allows for violence against children in their own home. It was an immense honour to change the Irish law, to bring it into step with parents, with children's rights advocates, and international best practice. By abolishing the defence of reasonable chastisement, we brought clarity to ensure equal protection for children. Our change in law was not all plain sailing, but it was so worth it. My advice to any countries that are considering a similar change in law is the time is now. The time for action in Australia is overdue. Thank you for listening to me today, and sorry that I cannot join you. I am here to help you to hopefully achieve a similar change.